All right. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon if you happen to be on the East Coast. Thank you all for setting aside some time to join us today to learn more about these considerable amount of previously copyrighted materials that are being transitioned into the OER space. We're very excited to share more details about the curriculum, about how you can access everything that's being made available. We do have a couple of assumptions in our preparations for this webinar. I know that there are a couple of folks on the call who are very familiar with Carnegie Math Pathways, but we wanted to at least approach this series of webinars without any sort of preconceived understanding of CMP. So we will spend some time doing that. But if you are familiar with the Carnegie Math Pathways and their approach, I think there's definitely something here for you as well. Probably in the second half when we really get into the OER side of things. Right. And before we jump in as well, please feel free to use the chat. There's two of us facilitating this call, and one of us will man the chat while the other is sharing. And to kick us off with introductions, my name is Dan Ray. I'm a researcher at WestEd. Carnegie Math Pathways is a project within the larger organization of WestEd. For Carnegie Math Pathways, I essentially oversee our operations and professional learning. Yes, and I came to this work as a Statway instructor, which we'll learn more about here shortly. Lewis?
Yep, thank you, Dan. Sorry for that. I muted all, and that happened to mute my co-presenter here momentarily as well. So apologies for that. But I know Dan reacted very quickly and got himself sorted. Yes, good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Lewis Hosey. I'm the Director of Development for the Carnegie Math Pathways project. So over the 6-7 years of my involvement in the pathways, I've been overseeing a lot of curricular and technology matters across Quantway and Statway redesign and implementation and associated projects that utilize the principles of the pathways. So very happy to be here. I'll be doing a little bit more of a walkthrough of some of the OER options later in this webinar. So thank you for your time today, and I'm looking forward to it. And just before I hand things off to Dan to give an overview of the Pathways approach and some of the key design principles that Quantway and Statway have been instilled with. Very quick overview of the agenda. We're currently just in bullet point 1, the welcome and opening statements. Dan will spend a little bit of time giving folks unfamiliar to the Carnegie Math Pathways approach and its curricular products, a little bit of an overview of some of the key design aspects of Quantway and Statway and how that is made visible in the instructional approach. Talking a little bit about timeline, so the actual shift to OER and the materials becoming available as open educational resources has happened already. So I will sort of talk through how you can get access to materials just now, but there are things that are continuing to happen throughout the spring and summer as we fully transition the program into the open space. And this will become a little bit clearer when we shift to the second half of the webinar, and I can talk in a bit more detail about those options and give folks here a little bit of a walkthrough on the CMP's OER site, which is where we can get access to curriculum materials and other cool things. As Dan mentioned, we can use the chat if questions come up throughout the webinar, but we likely will have some time towards the end for some quick Q&A. So all good there. And yes, I will hand it off to Dan for an overview of CMP design and instructional.
All right. Thank you, Lewis. So you will hear us on this call talk about two sort of sets of curricula. The first being Quantway and the second being Statway. So we wanted to kick things off by just giving a little bit of a description of these courses. Within each one, there are actually 6. You'll see 5 represented here, but so that you get an idea of how these courses are often used. Well, first of all, Quantway is a quantitative reasoning set of curricula. In Statway, it is more statistical reasoning, and I'll talk a little bit about how each of these courses are often used. The first being Quantway Core. Originally, Quantway Core was used for a developmental math sequence replacement. Initially, a lot of the institutions we worked with were very focused on having a replacement for what maybe 1, 2, or even 3 developmental math sequences prior to transfer level mathematics. But we also see that course used in some of our technical colleges that we work with as the terminal math course for some of those technical programs. And then there's Quantway College, which is a college level, transfer level quantitative reasoning course that has the typical learning outcomes that you would see in a college level QR course. And then in recent years, we've also developed alongside of that co-requisite supports. So it's that same base college level QR course, but with additional resources that can be used for a co-req, be that 1 credit hour, 3 credit hours, anywhere really in between. So that's the QR side of the house. On the statistical reasoning side of the house, we have Statway College, which is typically used as a transfer level, either intro to stats or elementary stats. We'll talk more about the approach and how it really, both of these courses, all of these courses are much more focused on conceptual understanding, and algebra and sort of algebraic manipulation is brought into things as needed in support of either the statistical reasoning or the quantitative reasoning. You'll also see that there's a co-requisite version of that course. Again, with the same sort of idea that if you have anywhere from 1 to 3 credit hours for a co-req, there are additional supports with the same sort of design to go along with the transfer level curriculum. And while it's not listed here, I'll also, in Lewis, whenever he goes into the depot, you'll see another course called Statway Pathway. That is still being taught at some institutions, although mostly in dual enrollment. It was originally intended to be a 2-term sequence for Intro to Stats. So all of the developmental elements were brought in, again, as needed over the course of 2 terms. Ultimately, it proved sort of difficult for colleges to implement that course because of the necessity of having 2 terms really back to back for students to complete to get that Intro to Stats credit. All right, so those are sort of big picture, the courses, but what makes these courses and the curriculum different than sort of the traditional approach? I'll go into some more detail here. Primarily, it is the instructional approach, the pedagogical approach that relies heavily on active and collaborative learning by the students. The instructor in a Statway or Quantway course is really sort of a learning facilitator, and direct instruction is introduced in very small doses as needed. And the learning opportunities are one of the sort of foundational ideas that the courses were designed around that base student learning on productive struggle. That's where the learning part actually is happening, explicit connections back to prior learning or real-world situations, and then deliberate practice. So once we get into the curriculum, you'll see that there's not sort of laundry list of similar problems. It is very targeted and intended to be deliberate opportunities for students to practice the skills that have been introduced. In the lower left-hand corner of this slide, you see the problem cycle. And I think this is really helpful for understanding how an instructor would typically facilitate one of these courses. The problem cycle is just an instructional routine meant to embody the learning opportunities. So typically an instructor would launch a lesson, which includes a problem situation that we'll talk more about here shortly. But the idea here is to really engage students in their interest and their motivation for why they're bringing the mathematics to a specific problem situation. After that launch, students would work in groups, typically maybe 4 or 5 students per group. They would be working the problem. They would be sharing their own approaches, and the curriculum is definitely designed to facilitate that. The instructor during this time would sort of be milling about the classroom, providing scaffolding, but not really confirming approaches, just making sure that students' conversations are being productive. Then the instructor would bring things back together for a whole class discussion where maybe certain groups are sharing their approaches, but again, very discussion-based. And then finally, the instructor would lead the class through a conclusion where they're highlighting the salient points from that particular lesson. And because of this and the way that the instructor interacts with the students and the students are interacting with each other, the main goal is to just create that nurturing community and sense of belonging for students in the classroom. So that's the pedagogical approach. The curriculum itself, I alluded to this concept of a problem situation. These curricula are entirely contextualized. Unlike sort of a traditional mathematics textbook where you have a lot of mathematical problems that are being solved, and then at the end, there's sort of a word problem or application that is viewed as an extension to the lesson. The word problem, the problem situation is the thing that starts the lesson in Quantway and Statway courses. And those problem situations are intended to be relevant, current, and really building interest amongst the students to go through and to do the mathematics to answer the questions that are being posed. You can see some of the context here around climate data, financial literacy, health sciences. It really sort of runs the gamut, and many of the lessons have alternate contexts that you'll see when Lewis gives the demonstration as well. One more thing before I leave the contextualization nature of things. Contexts do age. If you pull a data set from the NBA or anywhere, population data, that does get updated. All of these curricula were updated for this academic year, and our intentions are to update them every 3 to 4 years moving forward to keep the data set and the context relevant. Productive persistence is also the framework that we use to describe the social and emotional supports that are a very intentional part of these courses. So there are activities and routines for the instructor, such as a growth mindset activity that involves students reading about growth mindset and then responding to it. That's actually something that happens very early in these courses, which is, again, a bit different. The students are reading and writing, but it's also an opportunity to address some of the fixed mindsets that students may come to these courses with. There are very intentional activities and routines about fostering a sense of belonging. So there's getting to know you activities on day 1 of the course, for example. attention to students' self-reflected learning and the learning strategies that they're bringing to the course. There's an activity after the end of the first exam where students reflect upon how they prepared for the exam and sort of the pros and cons of their experience. And another great example of the social and emotional supports before the first exam, there's a stress reappraisal activity. We know that for a lot of students, they have math anxiety, they have test anxiety. Maybe you put those two together, that anxiety level really amps up prior to the first exam. This is an attempt to reframe that as your body just sort of naturally gearing up for a challenge. The results that we've seen, I should give a little bit of background here. These courses were developed, redeveloped, improved upon over the past 12 years. We are, again, researchers. We're not publishers, but we've been collecting data around these courses for 10 plus years. And we have seen, compared to students in traditional sequences or traditional co-rec courses, we have seen high success rates, higher than their matched peers. And those high success rates have been maintained over the years as we've been implemented at more and more institutions with more and more diverse student populations and larger student enrollments. And I can share a link whenever we switch out here that also has several of our publications and research around these courses that's taken place over the last 10 years. Which does get us to this question of why OER and why now? If these courses have existed and been developed and improved upon for 10 years, why are we making this transition to OER now? Besides the fact that we feel that we have a significant body of research around the courses that has demonstrated their effectiveness, we do recognize that because of the research nature of what we do, that it's been a hurdle for institutions to implement the courses and potentially even for students to purchase access to either print materials or electronic resources. And so, for example, on the research side, in order for an institution to implement these courses, they've needed to sort of opt in contractually to the research project. Student costs have been one of the things that has been cited as one of the reasons why even faculty or institutions who have been interested have not been able to implement, or they have implemented the courses, but they've had such a push in their state or at their institution to move to OER that they weren't able to maintain the courses just out of policy considerations. And Lewis is going to go into much more detail in a moment, but what's available now? We are, of course, in March, so all of our student-facing and instructor-facing resources are currently available. It went live in early March, so students can go there, instructors can go there, anyone can go to our website and pull down Google Doc versions of the curriculum. There is a process for instructors to sign in just to firewall those resources, since they often have solutions as a part of the instructor resources. Again, I'll let Lewis show us how that works. But we also have a technology partner, a student platform partner, and that will be we'll be working with institutions who are looking for LTI integration throughout the spring and summer. And in July, we'll officially be handing over course delivery for the student platform to the platform owner, Realize It, as of July 1st. All right, Lewis, I will stop screen sharing here and hand things over to you to show us around the OER resources a bit.
Superb. Thank you, Dan. Just give me a moment to get my screen set up here. Okay. So yes, picking up on a couple of things mentioned by Dan. So one tricky but rewarding challenge that the Carnegie Math Pathways program has been sort of involved in over the 12 years of its existence is the notion of working with such a large number of institutions across the US. Primarily, we've got some institutions outside of the US, but primarily across the US, has been how to find that balance between applying what is in essence a fairly consistent instructional approach that utilizes the curriculum materials as Dan described, but also wanting to recognize that there's going to be huge differences between and amongst institutions in terms of various affordances and barriers and student needs and faculty capacities, lots of different factors that could vary. And we always endeavored to do what we could within reason across those 12 years to try and go some way to meet the needs of institutions and faculty and students using Quantway and Statway. And this was something that we definitely wanted to keep in mind as we thought through what a transition to an open educational resources model would look like. So given that, we were very mindful about wanting the options that we would make available be flexible. So primarily the shift to the OER space sees the release of Quantway and Statway curriculum materials to the world using a Creative Commons CC BY NC license. And what this license allows users of those materials quite a vast array of permissions and how they might want to utilize those materials. So it grants users the ability to make local copies, to edit, modify, build upon, take apart, rebuild in some other place, rebuild in some other format. So the adaptation affordances are quite extensive under this license. The only stipulation is that any created product, derived product, is not used for commercial gain. That's the one primary stipulation that license includes. As I'll showcase in a few minutes, we have made the Quantway and Statway student and instructor materials available publicly as in Google Doc format. We wanted to make it as easy and familiar as possible for both educators, for students, for other interested parties to access and use the materials. So I will showcase a little bit of how we can work in Google Docs and a few of the really interesting features that are available in Google Docs as well. Now, as mentioned, this license, a CC BY NC license, does grant users quite a vast scope of modification and adaptation options. So you can do a lot of things with this curriculum material to meet the needs of your department, meet the needs of specific programs at your institution, or the specific needs of the students themselves. And it also includes the option of if you have the will, if you have the capacity at your institution to build the curricular content in a platform, whether that's your learning management system or some other content hosting platform that your institution uses. So that is allowable with this license. But it's very possible that one or more folks here have embarked on such a project at some point in the past and may recognize that it's a huge lift. There's a lot of work and thought that goes into building or taking what is essentially print mathematics content or mathematics content in a Google Doc format and representing it in a digital space. So what we did want to do is make the option available for folks to use digital content that is built already. And this is, as mentioned by Dan a few minutes ago, we have digital representations of all the courses available in a platform called Realize It, which is an adaptive platform that has hosted Quantway and Statway content for, I think, over 5 years now. It's aligned to the print content, so it allows for different implementations of Quantway and Statway courses and opens up variation in modality of those course implementations as well. Through the transition into the OER space, we have been able to work with our technology partner to bring the cost per license for students under the $40 threshold, which is what we believe is a typical low-cost materials threshold across many states and institutions. But again, just to stress, this is here as an optional low-cost add-on and not a mandatory requirement. Similarly, the Carnegie Math Pathways has had a long partnership with the sort of relatively well-known educational print publisher Xanadu. And we're happy that as part of this transition as well, we've been able to establish some new agreement with Xanadu to be the provider of Quantway and Statway textbook print options as well. And again, when I get into showcasing the OER site, there's some information on the site that I'll bring to your attention around ISBNs and pricing for these textbooks as well. Again, this is an example of an option that we wanted to make sure was available because we are aware that for a lot of institutions and faculty and even students, there is a preference of working with printed consumable materials for a whole host of different reasons. But it's an optional step here and not mandatory in any way. Lastly, before I get into the OER site, we do offer professional development opportunities as well. And I'll note when I go into the OER site, an area where you can get a little bit more information about some of these offerings. What I will mention here is that we do provide supports for new faculty, and which is definitely relevant for this webinar here. One thing in this realm that we are hoping to be able to apply our energies to over the coming months and coming years is the building out of additional professional development opportunities that align with some of the other options that I've got on the screen here. PD opportunities that might go extend to really focusing on sort of course and lesson design to assist folks and help folks think through any adaptations and modifications that they might want to do to the materials. And even sort of looking a bit deeper at processes around content contextualization and how to identify and build problem situations that allow us to confidently meet the mathematics learning outcomes that we want in materials. So So that just gives a very brief overview of some of the options available. I'm going to take this opportunity as I transition into the OER site, just to take a breath, take a moment. I can see there's a chat notification. I don't know if Dan is dealing with those, but I'll take a moment, 30 seconds, a minute, if there are any questions about anything that Dan or I have shared thus far.
The chat was, I shared the link to the report that has a
Yes.
full list of research reports over the past 10 plus years.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, I just opened the chat and I see it now. I was looking at the small notification at the top. Okay, so I will get started on the OER site walkthrough. So you'll notice I've shifted my screen to what is now the homepage of the Carnegie Math Pathways OER site. And if I scroll down a little bit, you'll see that I have a series of tiles further down the page that we can infer as relating quite closely to the OER options that I've been describing a few minutes ago. I do want to just take a moment to make a copy of this URL, and I'll put it in the chat for any folks that are eager to start digging in themselves. But what I want to do just now is I'm going to walk through a couple of these different tiles. I'm going to start with going in and exploring how we can access Quantway and Statway curriculum materials, both student and instructor materials. And then go into a few examples of student and instructor Google Doc materials, and we can spend a minute or two looking at some of the options that we have available in Google Docs for the curriculum materials. And I'll spend some brief time talking through the Quantway and Statway courseware and print services before kind of taking another breath and giving folks the opportunity to ask any running questions that they have. But let me start with going into the OER curriculum space. So I can hover my cursor over this tile here. I get a little bit of information about what this tile is about. I can click in, and I'm taken to our OER course solutions page. And here I can see, as foreshadowed by Dan at the beginning of the webinar, I can see here these 6 OER course solutions, including the Statway pathway solution that we described at the beginning of this webinar. Again, you can note that as I hover my cursor over each of the course solutions, I get a little bit of an overview descriptor of this particular course solution. And again, I can click into the tile to be taken to a specific page that provides information, a little bit more detail about this particular course solution. So I've clicked into the Quantway Core course solution page. I have some brief information about the primary goal of this particular course, some details about the course itself, its main mathematical foci, and some information about the scope of the material involved in the course, and some brief information about the ways in which we see it implemented, and links to associated digital components and print materials. And these 2 things I'll table for now and return to briefly towards the end of the call. You'll note towards the top right of this page, I've got a downloads button, and I can click this button to move down the page to what we call the downloads area for this particular course. And we can see here that the downloads area is arranged in 2 columns. I have my student materials column here, and you can see I've got links to all the student-facing material that comprises Quantway Core. Something to note here that links back to Dan's description of the curricular aspects of Quantway and Statway. He mentioned that for all of the OER solutions, we've got what we call standard curricular material, which is represented by these 4 modules in Quantway Core at the top. But further down, I've got what we think of as being alternative and substitute content. So this was content that various curriculum committee faculty groups with whom the Carnegie Math Pathways worked over its 12 years to develop alternative contextualized versions of some material in the courses. That is an example of us trying to go some way to meet the needs that specific institutions had sort of made visible to us. So what this for Quantway Core, there's a particularly large range of alternative and substitute content, ranging from what we refer to as fundamentals lessons, so a lot of pre-algebra and arithmetic support that instructors can access and utilize in a Quantway Core implementation. We've got a couple of social justice lessons which can be switched out with their standard counterparts. And similarly, further down, we've got a series of workforce lessons that can be used instead of the standard unit counterparts as well. What you may also have noticed is in the instructor materials, I can see listed a lot of entries here, but my links are not yet active for access to these instructor materials. So one thing you may have noticed is at this point in my demonstration, I'm not signed in. From a system perspective, I'm a member of the public. I may or may not be an educator. I may or may not be a student. I'm someone who has found their way to this website. And I can access all the student-facing materials simply by clicking one of these links. And it will open up that material in a Google Doc. So these are all the student-facing materials are fully open to anyone on the planet to access. When you first access the links from a course's downloads area, you're of course taken to our version of the Google Doc. So the first thing, of course, that anyone will want to do when they access a Google Doc is make their own version of it, so that once they get their own version, they can start doing whatever it is they want to with that material, changing it into a PDF, exporting it as a Word document, making modifications, making further copies to distribute and share with students or colleagues. So that's really the first thing we should be doing once we get access to the Google Doc. I'll come back in a few moments to a couple of other things I want to showcase about functionality available in Google. But some of you may be eager to explore the process of getting access to instructor materials. So as Dan mentioned, we did want to be mindful about who gets access to the instructor materials in an effort to maintain the robustness of those materials. And this is what informs a vetting procedure that we've implemented to ensure that those who do get access to the instructor materials will use those materials in a sort of responsible manner. The process to do that, we can click sign up. This is to request instructor access to the materials. Typically, after submitting some information about your role and background, along with email address and some preferences around communications. Folks on our end will review the request and confirm within 2 business days your instructor access, and that confirmation provides the opportunity to set a password for access to the OER site. But for folks here just now, if you have navigated to the OER site and you're interested in exploring the instructor materials, feel free to submit a request just now, and Dan and I will do our best to quickly get you access after we wrap up the webinar later in the next sort of half an hour or so. So I, of course, have a login already. So I'm going to log in just now and navigate back to my Quantway core page and scroll down to my downloads area. And we can see now that for my access here, I've got access to the instructor side materials for Quantway core. And I'm going to open up Quantway core module 1. So what we can see here, I've got my Quantway core instructor notes, and you'll note that both the instructor side materials and the student side materials both start with what we call a table of contents page, with everything bookmarked to make it easier for users to navigate to specific units or specific content within the material. Similarly, for your access to instructor materials, the first thing we'd of course invite you to do is to make a local copy. That's once you get that local copy, you're the owner of that version of the Google Doc, and you can modify, adjust, adapt, export, do whatever you want with that material. A couple of things I will kind of call out here, and there may be varying knowledge about these types of things already, but I'll do my best to make sure we're all aware of these things. Navigating back to the downloads area, some of you may have noticed a few links at the top right of this area. One being attribution, an aspect of the license, the CC BY NC license that we've chosen, as mentioned, grants users the ability, quite an extensive array of adaptation and modification permissions around the content, but it does involve a recommendation that any adaptations and modified products from Quantway or Statway materials are applied or are adjusted with what we call an attribution statement that just allows anyone who finds anything that you've adapted and made available, it allows those users to find the original source of the material. So on the attribution page that you can access through the downloads area is just some information about how we would like attribution for any modified or adaptations made to Quantway or Statway materials. Similarly, there's an accessibility page. Again, for those of you that have familiarity and have done work in Google Docs, you might be aware of the inbuilt accessibility features in that Google make available in their Google Docs format. So this page here sort of describes some of the key things that we've made sure Quantway and Statway course materials have adhered to. All images and diagrams have alternative text to allow screen readers to describe what those images and diagrams are showing or highlighting. We've made sure that headers, style, and nesting in all the documents adheres to accessibility recommendations, and hyperlinks as well, making sure that they're descriptive in adherence to accessibility recommendations. So the reason I'm bringing up this page is this, of course, provides a little bit of guidance about what you may want to be mindful of if you do start making adaptations and modifications to the material, which may involve bringing in new images or restructuring some of the material in some way. You of course want to try and maintain the accessibility nature of that content. And finally is just some support around making modifications and exporting content from Google Docs itself. Some notes again on the licensing, and really just some step-by-steps on different key processes around making local copies in Google Docs, giving others access to your local copy in Google Docs, and different ways in which we might want to export Google Docs into either Word or PDF or other formats that Google make available. So yes, a lot to digest there. Again, there will be a little bit of time at the end if folks do have questions. I do want to return now to very briefly talk through both the courseware page and print services. I won't spend too much time here. I think this will be something that folks here will be eager to explore either after we wrap up here. Navigating back to the home page, I can click into the courseware tile. And on this page provides a lot of information about what is offered by Quantway and Statway courseware. So as just a brief descriptor, the courseware, as I mentioned earlier, contains digital representations of all the material that is available in Google Docs, but in digital format. So what this allows for in terms of modality and implementation, it allows for the material in the digital space to be utilized as out-of-class activities for students. So it can supplement the collaborative experiences that you create in the classroom with digital activities that students would engage in prior to and post their in-person collaborative experiences. And it also allows for fully online implementation of Quantway and Statway. The collaborative lessons that we see listed in the Google Docs, these are all built in the Revise and the courseware platform and can be accessed by students in a way that they can consume that collaborative material in synchronous fashion with other students. And lastly, we offer two different ways that folks could access the digital content, either via LTI through your LMS system. And this is something that, as we noted earlier in the webinar, this is something that I'm working with our technology partner and interested institutions to set up throughout the spring in preparation for fall 24. If LTI access or LTI delivery is not what you're looking for, we do offer a direct delivery option as well. And what this looks like is that students and instructors would be logging into the technology platform directly and accessing content in that manner. Further down this page is a little bit more information about licensing and showcasing some of the sort of key aspects of the courseware experience for both students and instructors. So I invite you to review this page in a little bit more detail. There is an option at the very top of the page if you want to begin exploration of maybe using a Quantway or Statway digital courseware in the fall. You can sort of make a reservation for that just now, and note that there's no commitment. If you do reserve a courseware account in preparation for fall, you're not in any way mandated to use a digital course in the fall. but it just gives me and our technology partners some information to do any legwork and get any integration work set up well in advance of the fall. And lastly, for folks that would be interested in print options, on the print services page, we have a list of the 6 courseware solutions, textbook solutions, along with ISBNs and their price points. Note that in discussion with our print publisher Xanadu, we were really trying to keep the prices as low as we possibly could. So these numbers are the 2-bookstore price. So this is something that you may be behooved to explore in comparison to any local printing options that your institution may have on site or may already have available, and do a comparison and see what's going to work best for you. We are looking to open up the option of individual student purchasing as well, just again to increase the flexibility and number of options available for folks. This will be going live a little bit later in the spring, but just gives students at this same price point the opportunity to make individual textbook purchases if that's something that they want to do. But for bookstores, they can simply note the ISBN and the title of the textbook and submit a purchase order to the Xanadu textbook order site here. So this page is open to everyone. Instructors can navigate here and even share the link to this page with any bookstore representatives to ease the transfer of information. I see we're at just 6 minutes prior to the hour. Dan, is there anything you want to add as we sort of move into a short Q&A session at the end?
Just one thing quickly. I really want to get to your questions, but we've talked about these as entire courses, and they very much are entire courses, but please browse everything that you find there. If there are particular lessons that you really like, if there are activities and routines and the productive persistence resources there, if you're really looking for the learning outcomes for these courses, that's also linked on the instructor side of that page as well. So I just encourage you to browse and take advantage of these resources in any way that it makes sense to you and your students.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, I missed pointing out the learning outcomes. So I think that's a super important thing to make folks aware of, that for all 6 of the course solutions, once you get instructor access, you get access to the learning outcomes for that specific course product. And just a way of making these documents easy to navigate in Google, there is a nifty little outline option on the left side that maps to the way that we've used headers and nesting throughout all these documentation on documents to make it easy to navigate. So if you open up the outline, you can see the headers throughout the document and quickly navigate to each of these areas within the document. So at that, I will take a step back, take a breath, and if folks do have any questions, feel free to shout out or put in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
So Lewis, I teach the course online and I plan on using the Realize It, or Dan maybe can help with this.
Yes.
So there are a few things that I want to modify. Once I modify them, of course, they're not going to match what's in the Realize It. So do you have suggestions on how I might take my modified materials and use them in an online setting?
So One question, I don't want to get too deep in this because I could go very deep in this, and maybe this is something we take up offline or after the call, but have you put any thought into if you've already identified certain units or activities that you do want to modify, have you thought about the options of making them available either as alternative kind of PDF or even LMS activities that students do there instead of doing it in Rewise It? That's what I would explore in that situation, because the Rewise It content has to remain canon and it has to remain mapped to the materials that we sort of make available. So it would really be exploring the different ways in which the different formats and the different options that you might have available to surface adapted activities for students in a different way, and making it clear in your LMS that, oh, for this unit, this is how you do the activity. So it can get a little bit hairy, and I don't know if you want to deal with that complexity, but I think there are some options that we could certainly think through further.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, Aileen. Yes, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you so much. First of all, this is really exciting. I really enjoyed the presentation, so thank you for that. I actually don't work in higher ed. I'm more K-12. And you had mentioned earlier, I think, Dan, that there was a dual enrollment, type of collaboration happening that wasn't so successful. But I'm just wondering, we would love to see this coming more into the high school space as well in terms of these types of materials. Is there anything that you can share about how high school students or instructors might be able to benefit from this technology or even this course?
Yes. Louis, if you like, I can jump in on this one. So yes, we have definitely seen these courses, most of them, if not all, being taught as dual enrollment, but we have also seen independent high schools or independent systems adopt them in the K-12 setting, typically for seniors, maybe juniors and seniors. And for independent, then of course it's whatever course it makes sense for them to be utilized in. And while I mentioned sort of the challenges around Statway Pathway, which is still being taught right now in high schools, I think that the challenge there is more on the college side of things. It's because of the two-term sequence and keeping those students together from term one into term two. Adoption at the high school level would be the same as it would be for our college partners, and what we've typically seen there, where the resources are there, student facing, can be pulled down, they can be printed locally. If it's easier to connect to the Google Docs, they can be shared that way. The platform will still be available to students and to those instructors. Again, more information will be posted on July 1st. But they can log in directly into the Realize It platform and utilize the online content there. We're also optimistic, hopeful, that there will be a Google Classroom integration that's available from there as well. And I know that's something that we've had historically because of the interest from K-12 systems and their use of Google Classrooms.
Great, thank you so much.
I'm just typing out a response to Carolyn, but maybe I know we're 1 minute past the hour, and we don't want to keep anyone beyond their scheduled allocation for this. So if you do need to jump off, thank you so much for your time and attention today. Dan and I think Dan put our email addresses into the chat. So if anything does come up once we wrap up here, feel free to reach out by email. Is Carolyn still here? And I can quickly
I'm still here if you want to. Yeah.
Oh, hi there. Yeah, so
Uh,
what I was going to what was in the process of typing out in the chat, just to return to this idea of what's different and similar between all the course solutions. So I would say that, as Dan was describing, we can think of the course design around collaborative and active and contextualization as being a through line across all solutions. So all 6 course solutions have that same problem situation start and are built and designed around this idea of a problem cycle routine. So that is consistent across all the course solutions. The difference between each course solution is primarily going to be the target student population that the course is intended to serve, and then variation in expected contact hours and course volume, depending on the needs of those, like a particular implementation at a school. And of course, the Quantway core is one that maybe sits differently to the other core solutions, being the course that replaces that developmental sequence, as opposed to the other solutions that are transfer and college level credit. And I would, if you have the time, I would encourage going into the learning outcomes. I think might even go even deeper into that, so you can actually bring up 2 learning outcomes documents and do that kind of comparison quickly. I would really encourage that.